Welcome to your online tutorial. The tutorial topic is on embedding quotes. It's an introductory tutorial, so it's quite a basic look into what is embedding quotes and how do we do it. What does embedding quotes mean? To quote is to take evidence directly from the text and put it in your essay. It's totally necessary. Every time you write an essay, you will be required to use quotes. It is a skill that's going to help you not only in your Year 9 course, but as you move through English till the end of high school. When you are writing your essay, you need to highlight to the reader that you are taking words directly from the text. You do this by using quotation marks, which look like this. Every time you put in a quote in your essay, it should be surrounded by those two quotation marks. Think of it like a little hug. But you've got to be careful. In English, we also use quotation marks to indicate dialogue in a narrative. They're not the same things. For example, if I was writing a story and I was writing as an author and I made my character Sarah scream, "Mum, put it down." Her screaming out, "Mum, put it down," would have quotation marks just to show the reader that she's speaking. This is really different to how we use quotation marks with evidence. Evidence is the quotation marks when we use evidence is only to direct the reader to let them know that whatever words you're using have been lifted completely from your text. Every time I refer to text, I'm talking about the book that you're studying or the film that you're studying, not your own essay. Well, why do we need to use quotes? Quotes are necessary in order to demonstrate your understanding of the text using the text itself. I like to think of it this way. You imagine yourself as a lawyer in court, and every time you make a claim about the text, you must back it up with evidence. If you're going to have any insight about a character, you need to then show the reader that you've got that impression from the text and pinpoint exactly where. You pull out that text and you put it in your essay as an embedded quote. The difference between embedded quotes and non-embedded quotes. Well, if we work with the quote below, Aunt Harriet was never referred to again, on page 67 of the chrysalids, I'll give you an example of using that quote in a non-embedded way and then using it in an embedded way. Remember that our aim is to embed quotes. The non-embedded use looks like this. Aunt Harriet was never referred to again. This shows that although Wyndham never directly states that Aunt Harriet drowns herself in the river, it is likely that her death was self-initiated. We know that this is not an embedded text, embedded quote, and I'll show you where. It's here. The quote, as we can see, has the quotation marks and then a full stop. It is its own sentence. We then go on to have our analysis. This would be the explain part of your teal. This is wrong because we need our quotes to be part of a sentence that we've already made. It means that we're using it in fluid matter. Our example is below. With embedded use, we see, although Wyndham never directly states that Aunt Harriet drowns herself, she was never referred to again in the Strom household, suggesting that her death was self-initiated. I just want to show you why this is an embedded quote. You can see here the quote opens up to the left and to the right, and it's fully within a sentence. This whole passage is just one sentence. Even if I was to put the full stop here, it would still be considered an embedded quote because it's opened here. It's within a sentence. Using a comma can often help you put in the quote. Putting a quote and embedding the quote into your sentence will generally make it longer. So generally speaking, you'll need to use a comma. Now it's your turn to do it. Remember, you may use commas to ease the fluidity of your writing. Use sentence starters such as when a character sees that. So if you know that the quote has been pulled from a conversation between two characters where some really important dialogue is happening, you can say, when Uncle Axel is speaking to David, he says that, and then go straight into the quote. That is an embedded quote. Cut off any parts of the quote at the start or the end of it that are difficult to work with. Turn to your worksheets and you'll have the non-embedded quote here on your worksheet. I need you to pause the video now, read through the quote, and then go to your worksheet and rewrite the passage so that the quote at the top is embedded fluidly. Do that now. Okay, now that you've done that, it's time to check your work. I've repeated the passage just up here. This is how I would embed it. Ours may look different to one another, but as long as it's got the same kind of formula. Uncle Axel is one of the only people in Rocknook who questions the truth of the repentances, telling David that Nicholson himself admits that he was writing some generations after tribulation came. It's embedded because it goes straight into the quote. There's no full stop just above it. It's not floating around. It is attached to a sentence. One thing that I have done is I've lopped off part of the quote that doesn't seem to fit, and it means that my sentence reads better. The only part of the quote that I used, if we look back up here, is starting from here. He admits. And then closed it. I took away all the first part because I didn't need it. You can rephrase it in your own words and then just use what you need. In this, I cut the quote to suit my sentence. I ensured that the quote was part of a sentence, and I referred to the wider context, the conversation between Uncle Axel and David. You can see that here. Uncle Axel is one of the only people in Rocknook who questions the truth of the repentances, telling David that Nicholson himself admits that he was writing some generations after tribulation came. Telling David was the key part of this sentence that helped me embed, because I referred the reader to where it was happening. I knew that that quote came from a conversation. And that's why it's important that you don't just have a list of quotes and you don't know where they come from in the book. You need to demonstrate that you have an understanding not only of what the quote says and its significance, but where generally it was said in the book, because it can help you when you're setting up your embedded quotes. That's the end of the online tutorial. You'll need to finish the worksheet that you have in front of you to keep practicing. Please hand it to your teacher at the end of the lesson, and you'll get some feedback on how you went with that work.